Hello, for those of you that don't know us, Chris, Dan, we do a podcast called Nothing But Static about TV, and these are some videos listing our thoughts on various subjects.
We know the internet loves a good list.
Yep.
So we thought the logical step to take there was to create some lists of things that we think.
Yeah.
This is almost the ultimate list if you're into television. This is the list that every TV fan has.
Yeah,
You've
absolutely.
all guaranteed thought about this. This is which shows were the most personally devastating shows to see cancelled.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, this is
just our opinion.
highly subjective, as will most of our lists be. So feel free to tell us what you think and whether you agree or don't agree. But please do try to stay polite, mostly to each other. You can shit on us all you like.
Yeah.
We're pricks. But do be nice to each other. That would be lovely. We would appreciate that. Genuinely. That is I know that we do sometimes say stupid things, but that's a sincere request.
Here is the list.
So enjoy.
I think every TV fan knows the pain of watching a show they love get cancelled before its time. In most cases, not only will that fan never receive closure on any of the open stories, but the show in question almost never gets a chance to realise its full potential.
It's not always just the pain of losing something that's good, it's the frustration of knowing it may have gotten better with time. With that said, let's take a look at the 10 cancellations Chris and I felt to be the most devastating. Number 10. Dollhouse. Dollhouse is arguably not the best show to come from the mind of geek hero Joss Whedon, but Dollhouse is one of those shows where it always felt like both the writers and the network had very different notions of what the show should be. And while the result was inconsistent, Dollhouse showed glimmers of something incredible it never got a chance to be. And this made the cancellation even more painful to take.
For those unfamiliar, Dollhouse is a science fiction show with a premise so unique it's difficult to properly explain it in one sentence. Basically, it revolved around people known as dolls, who are being held captive by a mysterious organisation who have had the dolls' personalities removed, so that they can have any personality embedded on them, allowing the organisation to essentially pimp them out to anyone willing to pay for such a flexible service. These dolls can be made to be or do anything, which meant that the show could be anything it wanted to be week to week, thanks to that really robust premise.
It dealt with fascinating themes, such as free will and slavery, and had the scope to run for a very long time. It was dark, atmospheric, interesting, and funny, which combined with the show's potential and one of the best casts on TV, made for a project that, despite some inconsistency, left me desperate for more once it was over. Number 9. Mind Games.
Mind Games is a drama from one of our favourite underappreciated writers, Kyle Killen. It revolved around two brothers, a con man and an expert on human behaviour, and they start a company in order to put these skills to use and help others by manipulating circumstances and taking fate out of the equation.
But that premise wasn't really what made the show great. It was how brilliantly it invested us in the people, whether it be the central characters who appeared every week or one of the characters who appeared only just for one story of the week. They were always engaging. And that really is the secret to making an episodic show work, investing the audience in those stories that theoretically won't matter next week.
A lot of that credit does have to go to the excellent cast, but a lot of it is in the writing. It also helps that the premise was wisely designed in a way that meant the show had a lot of potential going forward. It was our favourite new show of 2014 and we really were sad to see it go.
Number 8. Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip. This Aaron Sorkin-penned dramedy about the struggles of working on a high-pressure weekly sketch show really hit home for me. It's possible I'm biased because of the subject matter, but watching the struggle between the creative and business side of television play out in a way that forced you to consider both sides of the argument was a really engrossing experience for me.
And it helped that the characters had the Sorkin flourish of being very likeable, whilst also being conflicted enough to be very interesting. It's a show that felt as confident and unique as anything else on TV, and it made me laugh on command with a worrying level of ease. Combine that with the perfect cast, some tremendous dialogue and some truly insightful stories, it's hard not to wonder what could have been with this show.
I'm not sure Studio 60 would have improved over time, but it seemed like it could have continued at that quality for years, much like Aaron Sorkin's previous show, The West Wing. And the fact that I only have that one incredible season is a true shame. Number 7. Lone Star. Another of Kyle Killen's contributions to my TV diet, Lone Star was a drama about a con man's attempts to back out of a long con in order to maintain 2 entirely separate lives with 2 women, both of whom he'd fallen in love with. And while this show officially only lasted 2 episodes, it had a tremendous impact on me in that very short time.
The truly remarkable thing about this show was that as brilliant as those first 2 episodes were, it seemed to be applying the slow burn approach to its storytelling, which is becoming increasingly popular these days. This approach gives the narrative the space to breathe, and it allows it to build towards something that would be complex, satisfying, and really dramatic at the end. The frustration here is that due to the incredibly early cancellation, we never got to see any of that play out, and the show's best hours never even went in front of the cameras.
And on top of that, this show had more than just great writing and an interesting concept going for it. It had a fantastic cast and some really well-crafted visuals in the pilot from 500 Days of Summer and Amazing Spider-Man director Mark Webb. Ultimately, it was an incredible piece of television by some very talented and passionate people that never got a fair chance to prove itself and build an audience, like equivalent shows on cable. The frustration for me is, had it been on cable, I'm convinced it would have been left to play out and would have become a huge hit. Number 6. Drive. Drive was a short-lived show about a secret and illegal cross-country car race and its competitors, some of whom were not participating willingly. On the surface, that premise does sound a little far-fetched, but thanks to the very sharp scripts and incredibly convincing performances from the likes of Dylan Baker, Emma Stone, and Nathan Fillion, the show not only managed to sell me on that premise, but it made it seem outright plausible, an impressive feat in itself.
But even putting that aside, Drive was one of those wonderfully fun dramas that you simply couldn't wait to see what it had in store for its characters next. The central and overarching mystery was utterly gripping, and every hint we received drew us further in, and the main characters were all entangled in their own stories, which were so perfectly chosen and paced that any one of them could have been enough to hold up a show on its own. Not to mention that the tone and pacing of the show was unlike anything else on TV.
And while Drive isn't the greatest show on this list, 4 episodes on those ratings was far from enough justification to end it as early as Fox did, and it remains a sore spot for me whenever I consider cancelled shows. Drive had all the potential in the world, and ratings that Fox would be very happy with these days. Ratings that match those of their recently renewed drama The Following, making me wish Drive had happened 5 years later than it did. Number 5. Wonderfalls. This is a show that was pulled after just 13 episodes, and if I'm being completely honest, that does not surprise me in the slightest. Don't get me wrong, this is a fantastic show, one of my all-time favourites, but in truth I understand why a show with this premise was possibly challenging to market and therefore struggled to find its audience.
Wonderfalls was the story of a graduate who had intentionally resigned herself to a dead-end job as a sales clerk at a Niagara Falls gift shop, who suddenly finds herself receiving advice from inanimate objects, advice that if taken yields positive results, and if ignored leads to disaster. Now, despite the premise being a little unmarketable, it was executed perfectly and really landed for me. It was funny, well written, and the characters and cast were wonderful and charming in equal measure. And the show used some very creative narratives to pull together a far more complex story than you would imagine possible from such a light-hearted show.
It will always be a painful loss for me because it's a show that always struck me as being something truly unique, something irreplaceable, something worth making a special effort to watch because, quite frankly, there was nothing else like it, and there hasn't been since. Number 4. Freaks and Geeks. I'm not sure what else can be said about the Judd Apatow-led comedy that hasn't already been uttered. Truly one of the most remarkable shows I've ever watched. It managed the impossible feat of perfectly capturing how it feels to be a teenager. Full of wit, drama, and more than its fair share of angst, it's easy to see how this show became a cult classic long after its original airing. And that's not even to mention the remarkable cast, including future stars such as Jason Segel, James Franco, Seth Rogen, and Martin Starr. Freaks and Geeks is a show I missed on its original broadcast. I know, I'm part of the problem. My excuse is I was 12 when it originally aired. But even watching it again recently was an absolute revelation for me. A tremendously innovative show that holds up like no other show from this era. The frustration for me comes in seeing how beloved it still is despite the better part of 15 years passing. Clearly they were onto something with this, and were either ahead of their time or simply not given enough of a chance to find their feet on the first run. Number 3. Pushing Daisies.
Pushing Daisies was a dramedy about a pie maker who had the ability to bring someone back from the dead for 1 minute. Any longer, and another living creature of equal cosmic value would die in their place to keep balance. This pie maker is brought in by a private detective to help solve murders by bringing victims back to life temporarily to get information and then help solve their murders.
It had a surreal fairy tale tone that carried its intriguingly dark story and its intricate characters into an oddly light-hearted package that was as funny as it was dramatic. Between this, the gorgeous and highly stylized visuals, and the fast-paced dialogue, this show may very well be the most unique product on this list.
But innovation is not the only reason that I've included Pushing Daisies. It's also because this fantastic show that felt far too wonderful and too quirky for its own good actually found a way to beat the odds and even got a glimmer of commercial success during its first season.
When the writer's strike began, cutting the first season short and delaying the second, the gap between the seasons this created was so large that when the show finally returned, its audience didn't. It had lost all of its momentum audience-wise and was subsequently cancelled as a result. I cannot describe the frustration I feel knowing that this show had actually found an audience, only to lose it just due to simple circumstance. Number 2. Journeyman. I can already hear many people uttering, "Journey who?" Well, Journeyman was an NBC drama that started the same season as Pushing Daisies. The only difference is that Pushing Daisies made it out of 2007, still in production. Cancelled after 13 short but astounding episodes, Journeyman follows a San Francisco reporter who finds himself being involuntarily forced backwards in time by a mysterious and unseen force so he can assist seemingly random people who require help.
The truth is, this may be a very personal choice, but aren't they all? As I mentioned up front, this list really depends on not just your own personal opinion of the show's quality, but also how much potential you perceived it to have. And I saw both of those things in abundance with Journeyman, in a way that few others did, evidenced by its ratings. And I do find it difficult to explain why this show made such an impact with me, while inducing shrugs from the rest of the public. But it was well written, atmospheric, interesting, and I was more invested in the story of the weak plots in this show than in any other I have ever watched. And it really took advantage of the time travel inherent in its premise, using it to create drama from our central character by forcing him to cross into events from his own past, but from a new perspective. It knew exactly what buttons to press from a dramatic perspective, and it had an overarching mystery that was playing out at a perfect pace.
Unlike the other shows on this list, I don't know if Journeyman would have ever found an audience, or if it's just some odd coincidence that it resonated with me, but if the category is most devastating cancellations, I can't think of much else that fits this title better than Journeyman. Except maybe one other. Number 1. Firefly. Were you expecting anything else? Firefly, in my opinion, remains one of the greatest missed opportunities in television history. A show with such substance, quality and passion is more than rare. It's non-existent.
Not to mention that following its cancellation, the show has proven without a shadow of a doubt that it had mass appeal, but simply hadn't found its audience yet. And of all the cancelled gems on this list, it's the show with the most tangible and obvious potential for greatness. For a start, it had a perfect concept, one designed to have enough scope that it could have run for a large number of seasons without ever becoming predictable. Like British science fiction staple Doctor Who, there was simply no limit to the storytelling potential of this show. And to add to that, the concept was perfectly realised by a stellar writing team.
For those unaware, Firefly was a science fiction western set in a semi-dystopian future where the government and order had ruled the centre of the star system while savagery and crime ruled the regressed outer planets. Specifically, the show followed the crew on board a ship called Serenity as they tried to find their place in society by taking work in any form it came, not all of which was legal or even moral. It was one of the first shows I remember to successfully splice genres in this way, taking tropes from science fiction and classic spaghetti westerns. Firefly was that perfect mix of action and drama that made for one of the most enjoyable TV experiences I can remember. There are too many things this show did right for me to list here, but rest assured, everything from the casting and direction to the lighting and music was top notch.
Unfortunately, Firefly was cancelled after just 14 episodes due to low ratings. No doubt, at least, partly caused by the perplexing decision to air the pilot last, leaving the audience without crucial information during those first episodes. Although it's worth noting that the creative team did do a fairly admirable job trying to get as much information as possible into the second episode to make up for this.
To see something so great torn down by something like stupid decisions at an executive level is one of the most frustrating and devastating experiences of my TV watching career, and that is why Firefly easily finds itself number 1 on our list. In putting this list together, I have noticed that all of the shows I've mentioned have been unique or different from the rest of the TV landscape in some way, and I think that the reason there are so many cancelled shows that really mean a lot to people is because when something like a procedural is cancelled, there are always other shows with similar cast and tone or content for the fans to turn to in order to get that fix. But when a show as unique as these is cancelled, nothing exists that can fill that void, which leaves us with a much deeper sense of loss. And this is why many of these cancellations are so painful, especially considering the passion and effort the various creative teams put into making them special in the first place.
So there you go. Obviously you're going to have your own thoughts, your own opinions. We'd love to hear them. So as we said before, comment below, get in touch with us on Twitter. The links are in the description.
Let us know which shows hurt you the most to lose.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or tell us if you agree. If you thought our list was pretty accurate compared to what you like, then throw it down there. We'd like to hear about that as well. Also, feel free to subscribe. We'd recommend. We're going to do a lot more videos like this. And we'd love you guys to subscribe and let us know. Also, suggestions for the list we can do.
No, that's a good one.
Nice one. Do that.
Or
you can catch us on Twitter at Nothing But Static. You can listen to our podcast, which is the full discussions that we have.
It's this without having to look at us. So
which is way better.
Win.
So much better. You might as well just be closing your eyes right now. You'd be getting a better experience. But to do that without having to actually close your eyes, our podcast, which can be found on iTunes, and if you go to nothingbutstatic.co.uk.
Yeah. Awesome.
That's everything. Also, we have a web series coming up.
Yeah, we've got a brand new web series, Writing Space. It's about 2 failing writers called Chris and Dan. Write what you know, they say. That's what we did.
Very original.
Yeah. So that should be out on July the 1st, so if you guys could check it out.
And just to clarify, that's a scripted web series. That isn't like these videos where we're...
Yeah, it's toned a bit.
Yeah.
It's a bit tighter than this.
I'm concerned that what we've done is create a scenario where people think all we're doing is putting up videos where we're just being ourselves. Yeah. And then we put up a web series where
characters are called Chris and Dan.
Yeah, that may cause some confusion. We may need to rethink this. Just scrap the whole thing.
It would be great if you could check it out.
Yes, we'd love for you to watch our web series. So come back to here this very channel on July the 1st.
Cheers.